The morning heat at Camp Henderson was already stifling when Private Alex Rivera lined up with the other recruits for the final week of Ranger selection. Day 57 of the program had arrived, and from the original 20 candidates, only 28 remained standing in the dusty training yard. Alex stood toward the back, her compact frame nearly invisible among the towering men around her. She had cultivated this anonymity carefully, loose-fitting uniforms that concealed her athletic build, a quiet demeanor that drew no attention, posture that suggested uncertainty rather than the coiled readiness of a trained fighter. Staff Sergeant Hendricks paced before them, his scarred face twisted into its perpetual scowl. 20 years of infantry service had left him with little patience for what he saw as the Army's social experiments. His gaze settled on Alex with familiar disdain. "Ranger candidates," Hendricks barked. "Today we separate the warriors from the wannabes." Alex had endured 8 weeks of Hendricks' particular brand of harassment. While other recruits faced standard military pressure, Hendricks seemed to take personal pleasure in targeting her. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned before her turns, her meal portions were consistently smaller, and she was assigned the most dangerous positions during exercises. Standing beside Hendricks was Captain Sarah Mitchell, the program evaluator whose presence at selection training was highly unusual. Most recruits assumed she was there to observe training methods, but Alex had noticed Mitchell's attention focused more on the instructors than the candidates. "Combat assessment begins now," Hendricks announced. "Since we're testing warrior mentality, Rivera gets to demonstrate first." A ripple of uncomfortable energy passed through the formation. The other candidates had learned not to interfere when Hendricks targeted Alex. Self-preservation was paramount during selection. Alex stepped forward with deliberate hesitation, playing the role she had perfected over 2 months. Her movements suggested nervousness rather than the fluid precision of someone who had been training in martial arts since childhood. "Interesting choice of volunteer," Hendricks continued, his voice dripping with theatrical concern. "Our diversity recruit gets to show us what 8 weeks of infantry training can accomplish." He gestured to Corporal Marcus Stone, a former college wrestler whose 20-pound frame dwarfed Alex's. Stone approached with obvious reluctance. He had no desire to hurt someone half his size, but refusing Hendricks's orders wasn't an option. "Standard takedown drill," Hendricks explained to the watching candidates. 30 seconds of resistance training. "Stone, use appropriate force." Captain Mitchell stepped closer, her clipboard forgotten, as she focused intently on the unfolding scenario. Something about Alex's posture had caught her attention, a subtle shift that suggested preparation rather than fear. The first takedown was brutal. Stone drove Alex to the ground with enough force to knock the wind from her lungs, but she absorbed the impact and rolled back to her feet without complaint. Her eyes remained calm, calculating, despite the dust coating her uniform. "Again," Hendricks ordered, his satisfaction evident as other candidates shifted uncomfortably. The second takedown was worse, Stone's reluctance overcome by Hendricks's pressure to demonstrate proper technique. Alex hit the ground hard, blood trickling from her lip, but her expression never changed. It was that unchanging calm that made Captain Mitchell reach for her secure phone. "Enough playing around," Hendricks announced, stepping into the training circle himself. "Let me show you how real soldiers handle resistance." The watching candidates fell completely silent. They had seen Hendricks demonstrate before. It never ended well for the volunteer. His reputation for crossing lines between training and abuse was whispered about but never officially reported. Captain Mitchell moved closer, her phone call completed. Whatever she had discussed had left her looking both concerned and anticipatory. "Rivera, assume defensive position," Hendricks commanded, cracking his knuckles with theatrical menace. "Time to learn what happens when standards get lowered for social experiments." Alex took her position, but something subtle had shifted in her stance. The nervous uncertainty was gone, replaced by a balance that spoke of years of combat training. Only Captain Mitchell seemed to notice the change. Hendricks grabbed Alex by the uniform and drove her face first into the dirt with unnecessary violence. "This is reality," he shouted, pressing his knee into her back while grinding her face deeper into the earth. "No participation trophies in combat." The candidates watched in uncomfortable silence as Hendricks continued his demonstration of proper technique. Several looked away, but none dared intervene against a staff sergeant during selection training. "In the real world," Hendricks lectured, increasing pressure on Alex's back, "weakness gets good soldiers killed. Every time we lower standards, we put lives at risk." Captain Mitchell stepped forward. "Sergeant Hendricks, I think the point has been made. Ma'am, with respect, this is combat training." Hendricks interrupted without releasing his hold. If she can't handle basic resistance techniques, she has no business wearing the Ranger tag. It was at that moment that Alex's body language changed completely. The passive acceptance vanished, replaced by the coiled readiness of a trained predator. Her fingers moved in a pattern that Captain Mitchell recognized with sudden alarm. "Sergeant, release the candidate immediately," Mitchell commanded. But her warning came too late. With liquid speed, Alex transformed beneath Hendricks's grip. Her movement was pure precision as she twisted from his hold, captured his extended arm, and used his own momentum against him. The technique revealed years of expert training in systems that weren't taught in standard military schools. Within 3 seconds, Alex had Hendricks in a blood choke, her compact frame perfectly leveraged to control a man twice her size. The staff sergeant struggled, then gasped as she applied targeted pressure to his carotid artery with clinical efficiency. Complete silence engulfed the training yard as the recruits processed what they were witnessing. The woman they had dismissed as weak now controlled one of the most feared instructors on base with terrifying competence. Alex held the choke just long enough to make her point, then released Hendricks before he lost consciousness. He collapsed to his knees, gasping and humiliated, while Alex stood over him with predatory calm. Captain Mitchell stepped forward and spoke clearly in a language none of the candidates understood. "Shadow protocol verified. Status report, Major." Alex responded in perfect Russian. "Assets secure. Evaluation complete, Colonel." The revelation hit the training yard like a thunderbolt. This hadn't been Ranger selection at all. Captain Mitchell, now clearly revealed as something far more than a training observer, immediately stood at attention and rendered a crisp salute to Alex. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled candidates who were still processing the impossible scene before them. "Attention," Mitchell's voice cracked across the yard with unmistakable command authority. "You are in the presence of Major Alexandra Rivera, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, recipient of the Silver Star and Purple Heart, and your new commanding officer." The recruits stood frozen, their understanding of reality completely shattered. Staff Sergeant Hendricks struggled to his feet, his face a mixture of rage, humiliation, and growing comprehension. "This is impossible," Hendricks gasped, still recovering from the chokehold. "She's just a recruit." "She was never a recruit," Mitchell interrupted sharply. "Major Rivera has been conducting an operational assessment of this training program for the past 8 weeks under direct orders from General Patricia Hayes. Alex's transformation was complete. Gone was any pretense of uncertainty or weakness. She stood with natural command presence, her posture radiating the confidence of someone accustomed to leading elite operators in combat situations. For 57 days, Alex spoke for the first time in her actual voice, clear, authoritative, and carrying an accent that suggested extensive time overseas. "I have observed not just your tactical performance but your character, how you treat others when you believe no one of consequence is watching." Her gaze swept across the formation, making eye contact with each candidate. Some looked away in shame, others stared back with dawning respect and fear. "4 of you demonstrated the qualities we actually need in Rangers," she continued. "You assisted struggling teammates without seeking recognition. You refused to participate in harassment when you thought it was safe to do so. You led through example rather than intimidation." She pointed to 4 candidates scattered throughout the formation: a quiet medic, who had shared his water during desert training, 2 soldiers who had subtly helped others during night navigation, and a squad leader who had consistently put team success above personal advancement. "The rest of you failed the most important test of all." Alex's voice hardened. "You confused cruelty with strength. You believed that stepping on others would elevate you. You demonstrated that you cannot be trusted with the power that comes with the Ranger tag." Hendricks found his voice, though it cracked with humiliation. "You can't just waltz in here and destroy careers based on some elaborate charade." "I didn't destroy anything, Sergeant," Alex replied coldly. "You destroyed your own career the moment you decided that abuse was an acceptable training method. Every word, every action, every decision you made over the past 8 weeks has been documented and reviewed by a panel of senior officers." Captain Mitchell stepped forward with an official document. "Staff Sergeant Hendricks, you are hereby relieved of duty pending formal investigation into training methods that violate Army regulations and basic human dignity." As military police arrived to escort Hendricks away, he hissed at Alex, "This isn't over, Major." Alex's response was quiet but absolute. "It was over the moment you mistook sadism for leadership, Sergeant." With Hendricks removed from the scene, Alex addressed the remaining candidates with the authority of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than intimidation. The 4 selected Rangers stood slightly apart, still processing their selection, while the others faced an uncertain future. Some of you are wondering about your careers. Alex began studying the faces of those who had failed her evaluation. You're not being discharged or court-martialed, but you are being removed from Ranger selection. She gestured toward Captain Mitchell, who stepped forward with assignment orders. You'll be given opportunities to demonstrate growth in leadership and character. Some will return to your original units with recommendations for additional leadership training. Others will be offered positions where you can learn to serve something larger than yourselves. One of the failed candidates, a former college athlete named Peterson who had been particularly vocal in his harassment, found the courage to speak. "Ma'am, how is this fair? We completed all the physical requirements, passed every tactical assessment, and failed the character evaluation." Alex cut him off. "Rangers don't just fight America's battles, Peterson. They represent American value. If you can't treat a teammate with dignity when you think she's weak, how can we trust you to treat prisoners humanely when you have absolute power over them?" The question hung in the air, forcing the candidates to confront the implications of their behavior. Captain Mitchell approached with a classified file. "Major, there's another matter that requires your attention. Colonel Bradley's office has requested your immediate presence." Alex nodded, then turned back to the 4 selected candidates. "Your real training begins tomorrow. What you've completed over the past 8 weeks was just the screening process. Rangers aren't just physically capable soldiers. You're strategic assets, who operate in situations where judgment matters more than firepower." She paused, studying each of them carefully. "The missions you'll undertake require absolute trust in your teammates and unshakable moral courage. You'll face situations where the easy choice is wrong and the right choice is dangerous." Before dismissing the formation, Alex addressed one final concern. "Some of you witnessed techniques today that aren't part of standard military training. That knowledge stays here. The methods used in this evaluation, like many aspects of special operations, are classified for operational security." As the candidates dispersed, the medic who had been selected approached Alex hesitantly. "Ma'am, may I ask how long you've been doing this kind of evaluation?" Alex considered the question. "This is my 3rd undercover assessment in 2 years. Each time, we've discovered training programs that had lost sight of their actual mission, producing leaders, not just fighters. What happens to programs like this? They get reformed or eliminated." Alex replied simply, "The Army can't afford to produce Rangers who mistake power for strength or cruelty for toughness." As Alex walked toward the headquarters building, she reflected on the cost of maintaining her cover. 8 weeks of enduring systematic abuse, of watching good people stay silent rather than risk their careers, of pretending to be weak while documenting the failures of those entrusted with developing America's elite soldier. But seeing the 4 selected candidates, soldiers who had maintained their humanity under pressure, made every humiliation worthwhile. Colonel Bradley's office was a shrine to traditional military values, walls covered with unit awards, combat photographs and memorabilia from 30 years of service. When Alex entered, she found not just Bradley, but General Patricia Hayes via secure video connection and 2 other colonels whose presence suggested this meeting went far beyond routine debriefing. "Major Rivera," Colonel Bradley began without preamble, "your evaluation has created significant controversy. Staff Sergeant Hendricks has filed formal complaints alleging entrapment and procedural violations." Alex remained at attention, her expression neutral. "Sir, my orders were to assess training methods and candidate selection criteria through direct observation. I followed those orders precisely." General Hayes's voice came through the video link with unmistakable authority. "Major, walk us through your methodology. How do we justify what appears to be an elaborate deception?" "Ma'am, effective evaluation requires authentic behavior from subjects. If Hendricks had known my actual rank and mission, he would have modified his conduct. We needed to observe his natural leadership style under pressure." One of the colonels, his nameplate read Morrison, leaned forward. "And you determined this style was inappropriate. How exactly?" Alex's response was measured but firm. "Colonel, over 8 weeks I documented 47 instances of abuse that exceeded training necessity, including deliberate equipment sabotage, food deprivation, and physical assault disguised as instruction. These actions violated Army regulations, basic military ethics, and effective leadership principles." "Hendricks is a decorated combat veteran," Bradley protested. "Multiple deployments, commendations for courage under fire. Being brave in combat doesn't qualify someone to train future Rangers." Alex interrupted respectfully. If anything, his PTSD symptoms made him unsuitable for a training environment where he held absolute power over subordinates. The room fell silent. Discussing PTSD in relation to a senior NCO was dangerous territory. But Alex had observed enough to make the assessment with confidence. General Hayes spoke again. Major, explain your selection of 4 candidates from 28. That's an unusually low success rate. Ma'am, we're not selecting soldiers for regular infantry duty. Rangers operate independently, often in morally complex situations where they represent America with minimal oversight. Character matters more than physical capability at that level. Alex activated a tablet, displaying her detailed observations. The 4 I selected demonstrated moral courage, selflessness, and judgment under pressure. They helped others without expectation of reward and maintained ethical standards when they thought no one was watching. Colonel Morrison studied the data, and the others failed character evaluation in various ways. Some actively participated in harassment, others enabled it through silence, and several demonstrated that they prioritized personal advancement over team success. Bradley shook his head. This seems like an expensive way to eliminate candidates who met all official requirements. Sir, with respect, it's far less expensive than dealing with Rangers who abuse their authority in the field. The incidents at Abu Ghraib, the civilian casualties from poor judgment calls, the international relations disasters when special operations units act without moral restraint, those costs are incalculable. General Hayes made her decision. Major Rivera's evaluations, the program will be restructured according to her recommendations. The fallout from Alex's evaluation began within hours of Colonel Bradley's meeting. By evening, she found herself facing an unexpected visitor at her temporary quarters. Colonel Marcus Stone, the same former wrestler who had been forced to take her down during Hendricks's demonstration. "Ma'am," Stone said, standing at attention outside her door. "Permission to speak free?" Alex studied him carefully. Stone had been among those she hadn't selected, but his approach now suggested something more than disappointment. "Granted, Colonel. The word is spreading through the base about what happened today. There are some people who aren't happy about this evaluation, and they're planning to make their feelings known." Alex stepped aside, inviting him into her quarters. "Explain." Stone hesitated, then committed to his warning. "There's a group of senior NCOs who see this as an attack on traditional military culture. They're talking about formal complaints, congressional inquiries, media leaks. Hendricks wasn't just random instructor. He has allies throughout the command structure. And your role in this resistance movement." Stone met her gaze directly. "Ma'am, I was part of the problem. When I was taking you down during training, I knew it was wrong, but I was more concerned about my own selection than about doing the right thing. That makes me complicit." Alex appreciated his honesty. "What changed your mind?" "Watching you handle Hendricks. The technique you used, the control you showed. That wasn't just martial arts training. That was someone who could have seriously injured him but chose restraint instead. It made me realize what real strength looks like." Before Alex could respond, her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She read it quickly, her expression hardening. "What is it?" Stone asked. "Confirmation of your warning. There's been a leak to military media outlets questioning the validity of undercover evaluations. Someone wants this story public." Alex moved to her window, observing the base's evening routine. Soldiers heading to mess halls, conducting equipment maintenance, preparing for the next day's training. Most had no idea that their institution was facing a fundamental challenge about values and leadership. "Colonel Stone, I have a question for you. If you could redo the past 8 weeks, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?" Stone considered carefully. "I would have refused to participate in Hendricks's harassment, regardless of the consequences to my selection, even if it meant failing Ranger School." "Ma'am, what's the point of earning a tab if you compromise your integrity to get it?" Alex turned back to face him. "That's exactly the insight we're trying to instill in the program. Rangers who value the symbol more than what it represents are dangerous to the mission and to the Army's reputation." Her phone buzzed again, this time with an urgent message from General Hayes. The media story was breaking within hours, and Alex needed to prepare for congressional scrutiny. "Colonel Stone, how would you feel about helping to reform this program, starting with testifying about what you observed and why you now believe change is necessary?" Stone straightened to attention. "Ma'am, it would be an honor to help fix what I helped break." 3 weeks later, Alex sat at a witness table in a packed congressional hearing room, facing a panel of representatives whose questions ranged from supportive to hostile. The hearing on military training methods and standards had drawn national attention, with veterans groups, women's advocates, and military traditionalists all weighing in on her undercover evaluation. Representative Sarah Chen, the committee chairwoman, called the session to order. "Major Rivera, please explain to this committee why you believe deceptive evaluation methods are necessary for assessing military training programs." Alex had prepared extensively for this moment, knowing that her response would influence military training policy for years to come. Ma'am, effective leadership assessment requires observing authentic behavior. When people know they're being evaluated, they modify their conduct. We needed to see how instructors and candidates actually behaved when they believed no consequences existed. Representative David Walsh, a former Marine and vocal critic of the evaluation, leaned forward aggressively. Major, isn't it true that you deliberately provoked Staff Sergeant Hendricks by appearing weak and incompetent? Sir, I appeared exactly as I was trained to appear. The provocation came from Hendricks's assumption that physical size or apparent weakness justified abuse. Walsh continued his attack. You used techniques not taught in standard military training to subdue a decorated combat veteran. Where did you learn these methods? Alex had anticipated this question. Congressman, Rangers operate globally and encounter various combat systems. My training included exposure to multiple martial arts and restraint techniques for situations requiring non-lethal force. Representative Martinez, a supporter of military reform, asked the crucial question. Major Rivera, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if genuinely weak candidates had been subjected to Hendricks's method? They would have been broken psychologically, potentially developing PTSD, losing confidence and either failing selection or passing with compromised judgment and leadership ability. The committee's ranking member, Representative Thompson, posed the question Alex had been dreading. Major, are you suggesting that traditional military training methods are inherently abusive? I'm distinguishing between training that challenges people to exceed their limits and training that seeks to humiliate or break them. Effective military training builds resilience and character. What I observed at Camp Henderson was systematic abuse disguised as instruction. Representative Chen asked for specific examples. Alex pulled out her documented observations, the deliberate equipment sabotage, the food deprivation, the psychological harassment that went far beyond standard military pressure. These actions didn't make candidates stronger or more capable, Alex explained. They created an environment where survival depended on either accepting abuse or participating in the abuse of others. Walsh made one final attempt to discredit her. Major, isn't it convenient that you selected only 4 candidates from 28? Doesn't that suggest unreasonably high standards? Alex's response was measured but firm. Congressman, Rangers aren't just soldiers, they're strategic assets who operate independently in morally complex environments. If someone lacks the character to treat teammates with dignity during training, we cannot trust them to represent American values in combat situations where they have life and death authority over others. The hearing room fell silent as representatives absorbed the implications of her statement. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Alex found herself back at Camp Henderson, but now the base looked dramatically different. The old brutality-focused training had been replaced with a program that emphasized psychological resilience, ethical decision-making, and leadership under pressure. She stood in the same training yard where Hendricks had humiliated her, watching a new cohort of Ranger candidates work through a scenario that tested their judgment rather than just their physical capability. The difference was immediately apparent. Instead of fear and competition, the atmosphere emphasized teamwork and mutual support. Colonel Stone, now the program's deputy commander after completing intensive leadership rehabilitation training, approached with the latest statistics. Ma'am, we're seeing remarkable results. Graduation rates are actually higher than under the old system, but more importantly, post-graduation performance evaluations show significant improvement. Alex reviewed the data with satisfaction. Lower dropout rates from psychological pressure, higher team cohesion scores, and better judgment under stress. This is what happens when you select for character instead of just endurance. Walking across the compound, they encountered some familiar faces. The medic Alex had selected during her evaluation was now a Ranger instructor, teaching combat casualty care with the same compassion he had shown to struggling candidates. 2 of the other selected Rangers were deployed with special operations units, sending back reports that validated Alex's assessment of their leadership potential. But perhaps the most significant change was Colonel Stone himself. The man who had reluctantly participated in her humiliation had become one of the program's most effective reformers, using his experience to help other candidates understand the difference between strength and cruelty. Major, Stone said as they reviewed the new training protocols, I've been thinking about something you said during the evaluation, about how power reveals character. What about? I realize now that the old system wasn't just selecting the wrong candidates, it was corrupting the right ones. Good people were learning to be cruel because they thought that's what the Army wanted. Alex nodded. That's the insidious part about toxic leadership. It doesn't just fail to develop character, it actively destroys it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Hayes, making one of her regular visits to monitor the reformed program. At 62, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades fighting for military reform. Major Rivera, the general said, I have news about Staff Sergeant Hendricks. Alex tensed slightly. Hendricks had been undergoing counseling and retraining, with his future in the Army still uncertain. He's requested to participate in the reformed program as a student, not an instructor. He wants to learn what he should have been teaching all along. The news surprised Alex. Do you think he's genuinely changed? That's what we're going to find out. If he can acknowledge his mistakes and demonstrate growth, he might have value as someone who can warn others about the dangers of confusing power with leadership. Alex considered this development, and if he can't change, then he'll be separated from service with appropriate counseling support. But everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Major, even those who've lost their way. 3 months later, Alex stood in the same training yard where her evaluation had culminated, but now she was watching a very different kind of demonstration. Hendricks, dressed in trainee uniform rather than instructor stripes, was leading a discussion about ethical leadership with a group of Ranger candidates. Power corrupts, Hendricks was saying, his voice carrying hard-won wisdom rather than its former aggression. I spent 20 years believing that breaking people made them stronger, that fear was an effective leadership tool. I was wrong. Alex observed from a distance, noting how different Hendricks appeared. The swagger was gone, replaced by humility that seemed genuine rather than performed. His interaction with candidates emphasized teaching rather than domination. Sergeant Hendricks, one of the candidates asked, how do we know when we're crossing the line between challenging training and abuse? Hendricks paused, clearly drawing from personal experience. When your goal becomes hurting someone rather than helping them improve, when you enjoy watching them struggle instead of wanting them to succeed, when you use your authority to make yourself feel powerful instead of making them become strong. After the session, Hendricks approached Alex with obvious nervousness. Ma'am, thank you for allowing me to participate in this program. How are you finding the experience? Hendricks was quiet for a moment, humbling. For the first time in my career, I'm learning what leadership actually means instead of just mimicking what I thought it looked like. Alex studied him carefully, looking for signs of genuine change versus calculated performance. What's the most important thing you've learned? That I was never actually making soldiers stronger. I was just teaching them to endure abuse and pass it on to others. Real strength comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. They walked together toward the headquarters building, passing other aspects of the reformed program. Candidates helped struggling teammates instead of mocking them. Instructors provided constructive criticism rather than personal attacks. The atmosphere emphasized growth, rather than survival. Major Rivera, Hendricks said quietly, I owe you an apology, not just for what I did during the evaluation, but for what I represented everything wrong with military culture that you're trying to fix. Alex considered his words. Apology accepted, Sergeant, but the real test isn't whether you can apologize to me, it's whether you can prevent future instructors from making your mistakes. That's what I want to do with the rest of my career, Hendricks replied. If the Army will let me stay, I want to help reform this system from the inside. Use my experience as a cautionary tale. Alex nodded approval. Redemption isn't just about recognizing past mistakes, it's about preventing future ones. If you can help other instructors understand the difference between challenging soldiers and breaking them, then your experience will have value. As they reached the headquarters building, Alex reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. The man who had once humiliated her was now learning to become the kind of leader she had been trying to develop all along. Sometimes the most powerful transformations came from the most unlikely sources. 1 year later, Alex stood before a new class of Ranger instructor candidates at the renovated Camp Henderson. The program had evolved beyond just reforming Ranger selection. It had become a model for ethical leadership development throughout the Army. Leadership isn't something you're born with, Alex told the assembled instructors, many of them combat veterans transitioning to training roles. It's something you develop through conscious choice, ethical reflection, and commitment to serving something larger than yourself. Among her audience sat Hendricks, now wearing instructor stripes again but with a fundamentally different understanding of his role. Next to him were the 4 Rangers Alex had selected during her original evaluation, now serving as assistant instructors and sharing their experiences with leadership under pressure. The old model of military training assumed that breaking people down was necessary to build them back up. Alex continued, but research and experience have shown us that resilience comes from building on strength, not from surviving abuse. After her presentation, Alex was approached by Captain Jennifer Walsh, a young officer assigned to implement similar reforms at other training installations. "Major, we're seeing resistance from some traditional commanders who argue that softer training methods will produce weaker soldiers." Alex had encountered this argument repeatedly over the past year. "Captain, there's nothing soft about our training. We still maintain the same physical standards, the same tactical requirements, the same psychological pressure. The difference is that we channel that pressure toward growth rather than destruction." She gestured toward a group of recent graduates conducting a complex tactical exercise. "These Rangers perform at higher levels than previous classes because they trust their teammates, think clearly under pressure, and make ethical decisions when no one is watching." Colonel Stone joined their conversation, carrying reports from deployed Ranger units. "Major, the field performance data continues to support our approach. Teams trained under the new system show better cohesion, fewer disciplinary incidents, and superior decision-making in complex operational environments." Alex reviewed the statistics with satisfaction. Lower injury rates, higher retention, better psychological evaluations, and most importantly, improved performance in actual combat situations. The reformed program was producing the kind of Rangers the military actually needed. As evening approached, Alex walked through the base one final time before her next assignment. She was being transferred to Fort Bragg to oversee reform of Special Forces training, a larger and more complex challenge, but one that applied the same principles she had developed at Camp Henderson. At the memorial wall honoring fallen Rangers, Alex paused to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. Her father's voice seemed to echo from her training. "True warriors protect others, especially those who cannot protect themselves." The evaluation that had begun with her face in the dirt, enduring systematic abuse while documenting institutional failures, had evolved into a comprehensive reform of military leadership development. The 4 Rangers she had selected were now leaders themselves, passing on lessons about moral courage to the next generation. But perhaps the most significant victory was Hendricks himself, proof that even those who had lost their way could find redemption through accountability, education, and commitment to growth. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not against external enemies, but against the darkness within institutions meant to serve and protect.